Go ahead. Okay. But okay, there we go. Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of the Mindminx Show. I'm your favorite Minx, and we're here at the home of the Mindminx Show, Bravery Studios. But there we go. Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of the Mindminx Show. I'm your favorite Minx.
Yeah, there's a playback happening.
At least I like my voice. All right, so we'll start that all over again. Hey, everybody, welcome to another episode of the Mindminx Show. I'm your favorite Minx, and we're here at Bravery Studios.
Listen, it's such a good introduction that you got to hear it 3 times.
3 times. Oh, my gosh. I'm so sorry.
We got multiple platforms going. We got multiple things recording right now.
We're doing it live.
Yes, yes.
All right, one more time. 3rd time's a charm?
I suppose that's how it goes.
Well, it is Friday the 13th, so...
Yeah, there it is. The technology is
Yep.
all wiry, crazy.
Okay, so one last time. Welcome to another episode of the Mindminx Show. I'm your favorite Minx, and we're here at Bravery Studios, the new home of the Mindminx Show. And I want to give a shout out to the sponsor, the official sponsor of the Mindminx Show, Jason Fitness, located in Fairfield, New Jersey. I am a Jason Fitness athlete, so go check them out. All right, so we got through it. We did it.
Yeah.
So I want to give a special warm welcome to my guest, Dan Martin. Hello.
Thank you, thank you. Nice and warm.
Nice and warm.
Warm in here. Warm
It is
September.
warm in here. From mid-September.
Yeah.
And there's an interesting story. We've been trying to get you in studio
Yeah.
for like 8 months now.
Yeah. Well, we met at the mixer here, the podcast mixer,
Yep.
big thing. Yeah. And then we had one reschedule, but knowing that it was on the 13th, Friday the 13th, I'm like, you know what? I guess that
Fate.
sounds good.
That was fate.
Yeah,
that was 100%
sounds cool to
fate.
me.
So we did it. And so I was doing a little background on you just because, and as we were talking when I came in, I like to have some kind of icebreakers, and it's easier than, a question and answer, because God forbid I don't know what I want to ask you after I ask you the initial question, so it's just more fun this way.
Yeah.
But you actually are a adjunct professor
Correct.
at my alma mater.
Okay, cool. You went from Montclair.
Yeah,
Nice.
I graduated
That's
from
very
Montclair.
awesome.
Yeah, very, very long time ago. I'm like super dating myself, but I graduated college in 2000.
Okay.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
Campus has changed a lot since
Yeah,
then.
no, there's a lot of new buildings over there, a lot of new stuff, a lot of construction, new laboratories, things like that. We got a neuro lab now, which even in my undergrad, I don't think we had. So yeah, there's a lot of.
What building was that in? Are they still named the same?
Yeah, well, Richardson is
Richardson Hall.
the building that has the neuro lab. Dr. Keenan is the one who runs that right now, and he actually taught me physiological psychology back in, I guess, 2011 or something like that.
I hope
maybe.
everybody has their dictionaries out, because we're going to be using some pretty big words.
Yeah.
But so I wanted to read this out just because I'm very competitive, and you were on another podcast, not one of our sister or brother podcasts. So I just want to put that out there. And she chopped this up a little bit, so I want to do it better. So Dan Martin is a Montclair State University professor holding a master's degree in psychology and cognitive science with professional applications in behavioral neuroscience. Your experience in scientific research includes EEG brainwave studies, behavioral studies, neural anatomical studies. She couldn't say that. She couldn't say that.
It's a tough word. It's a tough word.
It is not. You just say the letters. And investigations into various psychophysical phenomena. What does that mean?
Yeah, so, neuroanatomical, anatomy traditionally is like the body and where things are placed. So in neuroanatomy, it's like what parts of the brain do what.
Okay.
Essentially. The
Okay.
linguistic part of your brain versus like the memory part of your brain against your frontal lobe, against your precuneus, right, which is like autobiographical information.
Okay.
There's all different parts of your brain. Again, each one does a specific thing or specific function. So you kind of get the lay of the land. And then when you see certain activities like emotions or things that you're doing, and you can see what areas of the brain light up, it kind of gives you an insight into how it's processed and how it works, right?
Wow.
And then with the psychophysical stuff, that's again kind of mind-body interface kind of thing, where it's like, okay, well, what do I see physically come out of, right, that kind of interaction and even the psychology. So it's kind of like a lot of mind-body connection stuff and connecting psychology with biology.
Okay.
Which is a really big part of the science nowadays. As psychology tries to ground itself more and more into being a hard science, right, as they
Okay.
call it, rather than like a soft science.
Okay.
They get more into those kinds of methods of just, blood work, what sort of things are in the physiology, like what's happening in the concentration of peptides or hormones or whatever, right? And how that can even influence how the person thinks about themselves, how they reference themselves in that sense of like self-reference, right?
Okay.
How do I feel about this, right? All driven off of the physiology, right? And then you get into this kind of like, well, I'm thinking about how I'm feeling, right? But you're feeling how your body is in its current state. And there's kind of a loop, what I might call a self-perpetual process.
Oh, plug. That was a plug.
Right? Yeah. So that's kind of like what drives the idea between, even the workshops that I do and all this sorts of stuff, because it's like, you are the idea of what you create.
You are the idea of what you create. Wow.
Mm-hmm.
That's
Yeah.
deep. Alrighty, we're 7 minutes in, and we got 5 people on the check-in, so you guys are more than welcome to ask questions for Dan. That was interesting, but I wanted to go back just a little bit further because I found his resume. Like, people call me crazy.
Don't show that to the public.
I did. I found the resume.
I mean, if you found it, I guess it's out there.
Yeah, it's out there.
Right,
yeah.
right.
So you have your associates in arts. That's where you started it all.
Yeah.
In music.
Yeah.
Music business.
Music business.
Yeah.
Right. Which is interesting because it's music. You're not really like a performance major. Like, for example, we'll have like jazz performance or classical opera, whatever performance majors for music. But music business was, you got the traditional. They would still make you take theory and piano and kind of take the traditional classes, but they also gave you the application of the music business, which was learning about copyright.
Okay.
Learning about, how to essentially market your music, right? How does the industry work, right? Where sales go? How do you, digital licensing, all things like that.
Okay.
So you kind of got the lay of the land, not only in, music and performance, but you also figure out a little bit of how it is as a business, because I think a big problem with a lot of artists too is that they lose scope of the fact that, you are a company and a brand, when you're an artist. And a lot of people focus on their creative process and how they're making music and all those sorts of things, which is inevitably probably the most important piece because it's the product, right? But we get so focused on the product that we forget that there's a whole mechanism of an industry that if you do get picked up, you don't want to necessarily not know what you're signing away. If you're signing the rights to the master track, right, versus the mix that you have, right, versus the all sorts of different terminology that if you don't really know as an artist, you can very easily get taken advantage of. You can sign the rights to your own name away,
Right.
which this has happened to friends of mine where they signed on the dotted line with a record label under their name. And until the record was out, and also if they don't like what you're writing, the record won't come out.
Right.
So you'll get stuck 2-3 years writing in studio until they find something that they like and they want to push. But in that period of time, you can't release anything under your own name.
Wow.
Because they own your name, because your name is the brand, which the brand is the business.
Right.
And if you're in partnership, right, there's a whole, slew of control over that. And it's really, it's very convoluted the way that the industry is. And, it's hard being an artist because you have 7 jobs or more.
Right. So that's so how do you get to enjoy? Because usually when you're creative like that, it's something that you enjoy, that yes, you're talented at, but it's something you enjoy. Doesn't that take a little bit of the enjoyment away?
Yeah, what's really funny is a friend of mine, he made this like a reel, which was really funny. But he made the reel and it was like an overdub of like a Seinfeld episode. And he's going, what is this? What is this life? What are we doing? Right? Because and the caption was something along the lines of like being an artist and realizing you have to do content creation your entire life.
Right.
And it's kind of like this mix of like, for me personally, I love performance. I love being on a stage. I love rocking this instrument right here. And I love ripping that and because for me, music is about the human element. It's about human energy. It's about, bringing to the forefront the transmutation of self. And that sounds really fucking heady, I guess. But, you know, in the regards that like music transfers the self or changes the self. Like you put on a good song, right? And it just brings you to a whole other world, right? Or, you know, if you're feeling pain and you put on that one song that like alleviates that pain, you know? So for me, music is about human energy, and it's that energy of performance too, when you're with an audience and you feel the people and you respond to people and you look at people and they look at you, and there's just this really elegant exchange of energy in the performance.
I love that elegant exchange of energy. That was cool.
Yeah, so that's where I find solace in music for me. Other than that, it's a shit show. You know.
When you're writing your own music, are you incorporating that thought process in it, like that elegant exchange of energy? Is that what your ultimate goal is, or are you writing it and then that energy kind of is created on its own through that vibe?
Well, I mean, for me, it's kind of like music is the, as you'd say, like cathartic, right? Sure. People pull out their dictionaries real quick.
Cathartic.
But it's a release, right? And when I practice and when I play, I kind of just muddle around on the instrument. And again, there's a human element to how rhythms come out, how you make sound, and how you like create sound and respond to sound. Like if you hit a specific chord, like your body and your brain respond to that noise.
Right.
It's like, oh, this makes me feel this way, and this chord makes me feel this way. So kind of that play of like being really introspective with how the sound strikes me is kind of like where lyrics end up coming from. And I get this question all the time too. It's like, well, do you have lyrics first, or do you have, music first? And for me, it's always music first, because the music, I feel like you have to write to. I write on top of it to some extent. It's like I'm responding organically again, and it's kind of like who and what I am as I respond to that, you know, organically. It just brings about a specific mood and a specific energy, and that's what I try to give to people.
Well, I agree with that, because there's so many people that would be like, you know, I'll ask them like, what do you find to be more important, the words of a song or because like, you know, how many songs are out there that, you know, like Outcast, hey, that's not a great song, but the music makes you want to dance, you know what I mean? So for me, it's always the music.
100%.
I agree with that's what creates that bond for me.
There's a purpose behind music too. I mean, depending on, I'd say, what type of artist you are, what your goal is with music, because there's music that just, you know, makes people want to move, and that in itself is a therapy. You know, there's other types of music that's releasing or that's energizing. Like when you go to the gym, for example, and you put on that song that makes you like, like
that brings up your adrenaline.
Yeah, you know what I mean? So there's I think a time and place for every bit of music and every point in music, you know. So if you're going to a dance spot, like, hey, hit the 80s dance stuff, you know what I mean? Or whatever. If you go to the gym, right, you're going to listen to like heavy rap or metal or something like that, right?
EDM for me.
You know, like EDM even, right? Because that heart rate, you know, that's a psychophysical phenomena, right, as well. Even the psychophysical stuff, like how the BPM of a song mirrors your heart rate. So like normally anything that's EDM is like between like 90 and 120 BPM. Why? Because when you're in the club,
you want to be moving.
The movement, right, mirrors the biology.
Right.
And that's all kind of also how we kind of like, I guess, organically respond to the music, right? If it got this bump, it's just like, oh, okay, like, you know.
How many times have we, DJ put on a slow song and be like, no, you're killing my vibe, just you got to change the song.
Right, exactly. Yeah, there's a mirror constantly, I think, between how sound responds to us, and again, a time and place for each and every bit of it.
That's cool. I like that a lot. So I kind of answered my own question, but I'm gonna ask it for the audience. How did this music translate then into, you know, what you ended up getting your bachelor's degree in, which is, you know, psychology and cognitive science, and then, you know, your master's? Yeah,
I mean, I wouldn't really say it translated. They were kind of just parallels, I'd say. They were like parallel explorations, I guess, that I had. Because I kind of fell into like spiritualism and music simultaneously when I was about the age like 16, like 15, 16.
Okay.
So when I started picking up music, and I simultaneously kind of was thinking about, I guess, just deeper energies. And I guess the way that I approached music was related to that, is an expressive element and things like that. So I've kind of always had this longing for like this deeper experience of the human condition. And it came out in my lyrics. It came out in how I approached music in general. But it was more of like, you know, not being satisfied with the everyday, you know, like when you're in high school, you're sold this kind of narrative of like, you know, go get good grades and go to college so you can get a job, so you can do this. And I'm thinking in my head, I'm like, well, I'm going to do all that so that looking at all these adults, it's like, I'm going to go do that so I can go do something that I don't want to do for the rest of my life. You know what I mean? In terms of like getting a 9 to 5 and doing that. It's like, y'all don't even like what you're doing.
Right.
And you want me to follow this whole path to go do what I don't like to do,
Right.
like do things that I'm not going to want to do. So I had a lot of kind of disdain, I think, for the way as a culture that we facilitated the human organism. Because this is, you know, this is like technology. This is something that took 1 billion years to probably create, right? And the way that we utilize that, it becomes very interesting. It's like, well, okay, so, you know, we have these digits and these fingers and this capability for sociality and language and building things, and we used it to make computers and like fuck up our posture and sit under lights that are hurting our eyes and messing up our sleep schedules, and using stimulants like caffeine to, you know, keep us from doing it, and then alcohol or whatever else to keep us from coping with the fact that we're not doing what we like to in the first place. Right. You know, so there's kind of this paradigm of like, what the hell is going on? And it made me think about culture. It made me think about assimilation. It made me think about why we do what we do as organisms and as people. And that really just kind of dove me into the deep end of psychology. It's like, okay, well, why do we do that? Why do we just blindly assume our conditions? Why do we, you know, kind of, I guess, you know, feed into these things? And what systems can we create? What systems should we perpetuate? You know, and that kind of dove me into cognitive science and being like, well, what is the nature of all of this sort of
but
stuff?
That's it's not, I know you said it's parallel, but it's not really. Like, that's one end of the spectrum to the other. Like, how did you know that this was, you know, because I remember when I first started college, you know, I was a 17-year-old, know nothing. You know what I mean? I didn't, you know.
As was I, yeah.
Yeah, you know.
Definitely.
What it was, you know, we had to pick a major because, you know, that's what you had to do. And I'm like, I don't know.
Yeah.
I picked English, and I don't know why, because I don't like to read or write, you know. So luckily I changed it later on to history. I figured that would allow me to open up as many doors as I wanted.
Yeah, I mean, even like English and communications and writing and all those things, and then history in that sense too, giving context to what you create, I think is really interesting. But I was the same way. Like, I was not an academic as a kid at all, like whatsoever.
Yeah.
I didn't give a shit.
I did what I needed to get by.
Yeah, yeah. And you kind of I had that like little bit of an anti-establishment like kind of mentality. I was a musician, and people called me a pothead before I even smoked weed. You know what I mean? Because I had long hair, and they're like, "Oh, you're a whatever," and I'm like, adults. You know what I mean? Like by teachers. I literally had to think a teacher one time called me a pothead, and I hadn't touched weed.
Wow.
You know what I mean? Ever. And I'm like, okay. And that's what it also made me understand. It's like, okay, there are schemas or stereotypes or ways that people intellectually make assumptions about things, and they're based on the surface, right? So me growing my hair out, me doing and me not caring about academics, which was really because I didn't really care the fact that Columbus sailed the ocean blue in 1492 when he was a rapist and a murderer. And, you know, just learning about the Civil War in 3rd grade and 7th grade and 11th grade, and just being like, are we really going to, can you tell me about JFK? What about Martin Luther King, who was, you know, murdered by the CIA apparently, you know, which is like released documents now. It's like, can we talk about that? You studying history, it's like, what's the context of this? What is Reaganomics? You know what I mean? What is you know, all these even what's happened 30, 40, 50 years ago, that's so important to the momentum of what's happening in society now that we're not giving context into. And they want you to focus on the fact that somebody found an entire continent that already had people on it. You know,
But
what
nobody
I mean?
questions why it's not called Colombia, it's called America. Nobody wants to talk about that.
Right, right.
Can anybody in the audience tell me why it's called America? Do you know why?
What I've heard, and we can only know what we're told.
Yep.
But what I was told was that there was a guy who was a map maker.
Yes, you are
Yeah.
correct. Amerigo Vespucci.
Right.
He drew the map, and that is why it's called America.
Nice. He had the most accurate one, maybe, I guess. He had the
He had the only
finest
one.
hand.
He was the only one.
Yeah, that's wild.
First to the ticket gets the prize. So
Yeah, and history's written by the victors, right? As they say.
always.
Yeah, yeah.
So that's it. You're right. So that's an interesting point that nobody's ever, nobody seems to want to think about those things. So we went from music to psychology to one of the youngest adjunct professors. And I Googled, by the way, I literally Googled today, how difficult is it to become a professor? And it's like 18 steps. Like I'm exaggerating just a little bit, but it's not an easy feat. So why, of all of the different avenues, and you do life coaching, you do have these seminars, and what was it about being a professor that called to you more than anything else?
So here's the funny part is it didn't really call me. I literally kind of fell into being a professor. I love discussing ideas, and I think that works to my advantage as a person who teaches and professes, right? I was like saying that. They're like, people are like, what do you do for a living? I profess, right?
Profess.
But I kind of fell into it actually because I finished my bachelor's and I took about 4 years after that. I got my bachelor's in psych, and I didn't really like how psychology approached the human person. Again, because westernized psychology was like you have thought patterns and thinking patterns, and this is your personality, and very fixed ideas of the self, where the self is something that constantly modulates. Like if you ask yourself, who am I? Who you were 5 years ago, who you are now, and who you are maybe 5 years in the future are different people.
Yes, I agree.
So what the hell is the self?
Right.
If you're going to ask that question. So typifying the self really only gives you a momentary picture into what the person is, into what the self is. So there's like much more of a deeper kind of current there in terms of that. And that's why I kind of naturally went to Zen philosophy and like all those sorts of other avenues, because they had a grander picture of what the self was. But reframe the question, because I'm totally digressing right at this point.
Well, yeah, no, you're asking the biggest sidetracker in the whole world. Wait, what was the question, Steve? Do you remember?
Steve's also back there being
shit,
what
was
a little
the question?
mind blown. But
does anybody remember what the question was?
Yeah, hit your YouTube.
No, we can't rewind, unfortunately.
Yeah.
All right, so let's see. Let's go back.
So we were talking. So again, I took a foyer out of psychology. This is where it was, because I kind of stepped away from psychology again because it typified the self. So I took 4 years in between my bachelor's and my master's. Because I didn't like how the West approached the person. So after that, I ended up diving into like yogic therapy and like all sorts of other things. And then come 2018, and I'm making a long story short here, I went back to academia because kind of music as an avenue. There's this really cool thing called brain entrainment, where your brain can actually resonate with or become harmonious with external like stimulus, right? So for example, like if anyone has heard binaural beats, or if you ever heard binaural beats, for example, it's like two different frequencies that are played in your ear.
Oh, okay, yes.
And one will be like 100 hertz, the other one will be 102 hertz. And the 2 hertz difference, your brain can unconsciously perceive.
Okay.
And 2 hertz is a resonance that is a brainwave frequency. Your brain resonates from about 0 to 30 hertz in terms of like cycles per second. So that can induce a change in your brainwave state by like really like zoning in and focusing in on just the sound.
Okay.
Right. So this kind of brought me from music and kind of like these even yogic kind of understandings and meditation and mindfulness, brought me into, okay, it's like, well, that does something to the brain and the nervous system. And that was where it was like, when I started realizing those things, that was like, okay, this is where I kind of need more accreditation to understand. So I went back to for my master's in psychological sciences, trying to do research. I got into a neuro lab by 2019, the Center for Behavioral and Molecular Neuroscience at Rutgers I was working at while going to Montclair. And then the good old pandemic struck us. And while I was working at the neuro lab, I think I was probably 8th in line, because they have, the head of the lab, they have the, assistants, and they have the PhD students, and they have or postdocs, right? Then the PhD students. And then I was a research assistant getting my master's at that time. So 2020 hit, and they restricted the amount of people that could be in the lab to like 2 people.
Wow.
So it got like, I was just like, I'm like 8th, 9th on the list. I'm like, it's fine. Like, don't even worry. So then it's when I doubled back and I approached the university and I said, like, you got any jobs? And I knew the head of the department. I participated in a couple of research symposiums that were happening. I used to run into the guy a couple times at some conferences. So he knew I was active. And I had so some of the professors kind of vouched for me. I was like, making myself known on campus. And then I doubled back. I talked to the head of the department. I was like, hey, like, can you throw me a bone? Like, the pandemic's happening and all this sorts of stuff. So I ended up kind of coming into teaching from there.
Okay.
But I really was trying to pursue like neuroscience research and like dive into that whole thing. And we'll see whether I kind of do that, because now I've gone into teaching and workshops and all sorts of stuff. And I have a couple, lectures I do in Manhattan and stuff like that. So I've kind of foyered into that rather than really getting my hands dirty in the lab. But I'm an extrovert at the end of the day. You know what I mean? So I like working with people. The laboratory and the science field is can be a lot of like isolation. I have friends who work in a lab and they sit there and they're really articulate and they're making brain slices and making petri dishes.
I was going to say, what are you doing in the lab? Because I know biology, what I would do in a lab, but like what would consists of working in a lab and
Yeah, so with the neuroanatomical idea too, right? Like what parts of the brain do what. The lab I worked in was doing research in a part of the brain called the anterior cingulate cortex, right? Which is right kind of behind your frontal lobe.
Okay.
Like we have 2 lobes of our brain, right? People at home, right? There's 2 lobes, but there's a little space in the middle.
Okay.
So there's actually more surface area, right? In between the 2 lobes of the brain.
Okay.
Or hemispheres, I should say, between the 2 hemispheres. And in between that space, behind your frontal lobes, it's right here on the inner part, is what's called the anterior cingulate cortex. And it's related to reward processing, and basically how we perceive reward, or really gets tricked or tripped off when we perceive a reward.
Okay.
Right. So we were doing research into that in terms of, in a nutshell, the difference of how that part of the brain was activated in normal people versus drug addicts. We were having both of them in the lab. And we have them play like a really simple computer game. So on the surface, they have no idea. They go in fMRI, and then we put to get an initial scan of like the placement of certain parts of the brain, and then we'll do an EEG, right, which reads the brain waves on them, while they just play this little video game. And it's a little maze, and they have no idea that we're looking at what we're looking at. And they're playing a little game, and they're like moving around the maze and doing whatever. And every time you make the right choice in the maze, a little apple shows up on the screen, right? If you go the wrong way, an orange shows up on the screen, right? So as you're going, right, you turn one direction and the apple goes on the screen, and you're kind of like, yeah, all right. The orange comes out, and we're like, so those little tiny responses in the brain of like, yes, okay, cool, right? We were looking at that response in the brain and how active it was in normal people, right, which is our control group, and then in drug addicts, because the theory goes that, which can be twofold, whether a drug addict maybe has do they have lesser response in the part of reward in their brain?
Okay.
And the theory could be either direction, right? It could be like, well, maybe they don't have a very active anterior cingulate. They don't feel reward from everyday things, so they seek drugs.
Okay.
Right? Or it could be the opposite, reverse, where they've done drugs, and therefore that part of the brain is fried. Right, so they don't get reward out of normal everyday things anymore.
Gotcha.
Right, and this is the hard part with science, is because what we're trying to decipher is causality, right? Which direction is it, right? And there's creative ways you can make experiments to kind of pull that apart, right? But at the end of the day, you gotta. What we were really doing was seeing to really verify the theory experimentally with individuals, do drug addicts have similar responses, is a different area of the brain responding to reward, right? Because you don't know until you look, right? It's really one of those things.
Oh, I have a question for that. Like, okay, so you're working specifically with drug addicts who use a drug, let's say cocaine, whatever, like that. What about different addictions? Would that have the same effect on the brain? Like a food addiction?
Yeah, well, pathologically speaking, it's the same in terms of
Okay.
like, it's like a dopamine hit, right? As they say, right? There's a dopamine every time you do that. But drugs through use obviously have a much more detrimental effect
Okay.
on the brain over
Right.
time. So food addiction is fine. Well, that's not fine. But I mean, in terms of like, it's not gonna, it kind of will mess up. I see now I'm putting words in my mouth. Because it does affect your brain too, but it doesn't affect your brain as much as like doing,
Adding a
ketamine
chemical.
or something
Gotcha.
over and over, or
Okay.
doing way too much LSD, right? Because that's going to hugely affect the brain differently than like a hot dog.
Okay.
A hot dog will slow
Or
your
like
heart rate.
alcoholism or
Right. Yeah, there's
a
actually
gambling addiction.
Yeah, there's a specific disorder with that happens with alcoholism called Korsakoff syndrome, and it's actually like I think your brain like literally starts thinning
Really?
because again, alcohol is an acidic thing, and over time it really just dehydrates the shit out of your brain, makes your brain cells just not operate and function properly, let alone what it does to your liver,
Right.
what it does to all those sorts of things. Right? So obviously gambling, right, doesn't have that kind of
Physical effect on the body.
right.
Yeah.
But also it has a pathological effect to the
Right.
point where now you're sensation seeking, right? You want that rush, right? So your behavior is much more changing. And you might have the similar sensation seeking, like an alcoholic wants to go get drunk and a gambler wants to go make bets.
Right.
You might have a similar drive, but the results of whatever that addiction is, obviously is going to be way, way different.
Different.
Yeah.
Gotcha. Okay.
Yeah.
That was okay. Thanks.
Yeah, of course.
That was cool.
Yeah,
All
yeah.
right. So, but I understand. I did read. I want to say it was on the college's website that not only you do are a professor for students, you actually do seminars for other professors as well. And I'm like,
How did you find this stuff?
I'm
man?
good at
That's
what I do.
crazy.
I'm good at what I do.
For sure.
But I
Yeah.
just like, it was like a mind fuck. I'm like, holy shit. Like he's teaching other professors how to get the students to
Yeah.
engage in. So how did that happen?
Well, I worked with one of the things that I was really mind blown about by working at a university was like it was really hard to meet coworkers, like because the university is so spread out and like your class schedule is your class schedule. Like I
Right.
have, so it was really hard to like catch other professors and be like, hey, like before you go to your class, like you want to get coffee or
Yeah.
like. So it was really hard to meet people actually. So I ended up. There's a union, an adjunct union
I
for
saw
all the
that, yep.
professors. Yeah, so I ended up going to their adjunct meeting, and again, being like some super young guy, they're like, "Who are you? Why are you here?" I'm like, "I work here also." Hi. So I ended up going there and like kind of meeting people, and I mentioned I study psychology and all sorts of stuff, and I, naturally, I feel like psychology is kind of one of those like immediately applicable sciences. Like, you know what I mean? Like you can study chemistry, right? But you can't really apply that to
Sure.
everyday life as
Right.
much, right? Like
Right.
the amount of moles in like sodium, potassium, whatever. It's like it doesn't really help you, right? But psychology is one of those things where it's like once you learn something, you can immediately apply it
Sure.
and put it into practice, right? So for teaching, it just comes in handy, and it's like, listen, you understand a couple things about like how we're incentivized or how we're social animals or like whatever, and you kind of use that to your advantage in terms of teaching because. One thing's sometimes they make me teach Psych 101, which is, a little baseline. But for those students, sometimes I do like a little Jeopardy game and I make them pair up and I tell them, oh, it's extra credit on your test if whatever team gets, and then everyone's hand is like, because it's like you give them incentive, you make them work together, you
Sure.
do like a couple little tactics, and it's much deeper than that in terms of some of the techniques I talked about. But it's just funny because, and sometimes half the time I'm like, yeah, whoever gets it gets extra credit. And then the test comes and like, they totally forgot about it. Like, they're like, hey, weren't we supposed to get extra credit on I was like, yeah, but it just to kind of incentivize them in the moment.
Sure.
And, if I sit there and do a review sheet, I'm like, who wants to answer number one? People are gonna be like, but if you make it a game and you gamify it, right, and you understand incentives and you I think it helps too that I'm younger, that I can kind of relate to them, and I literally sometimes walk out into class, I'm like, it was good, everybody, like, you know, because I kind of try to dissolve that, like, I'm the professor and you're the student. I kind of try to dissolve that whole hierarchy idea, because I think it kind of like gets in the way of
interesting
learning. I don't know, to some extent.
But don't you fear that it'll also blur that line as well? So like, for me, I like having that defined line, because we can be cool, but we aren't friends. Like, I look at it from perspective of my kids. My kids are now adults, and I'm still relatively young. So, you know, like, no, don't get it twisted. I'm still your mother. I will still beat your ass. You know what I mean? Type of.
Yeah, of course. I'll still fail you. You know what I mean? Like, it's like I can be cool with you, and I can have a conversation in a way that is kind of like not imposing, and it's relaxed, but at the same time, I'm going to tell you the function of the anterior cingulate cortex, and I'm going to ask you to write it down on a piece of paper later, right? Like, if I give you a piece of information, I expect you to know it, to regurgitate it, and to give it, right? But I don't have to have like a whole complex about, you know, being like, I'm more important than you. But it's like, you know, I come in with the perspective of like, listen, I know some shit, I'm going to tell you. You know what I mean? And as far as that goes, I'm flexible with people. And when people are in college, like when I did my master's, I had 3 part-time jobs. I was in a band. I had a girlfriend, like, and I was like going to school at night. And it's like, you have to be accommodating to the fact that these people, their life is not your class. And I think a lot of professors sometimes think about that. They're like, well, you should have been reading. Like, why didn't you read? And it's like, bro, like, life is very complex. And like, sometimes, even if you're not in an emotional space, it's harder to absorb information, you know? And this is just a fact of the nervous system. Again, as you start to understand those things. I did a conference one time, and I presented on this idea, learning mindset and mindfulness, right? And it was this idea of using almost mindfulness in a classroom too, like approaching it with a state of mindfulness, understanding where your neurophysiology is implicitly, which sounds really complicated, but it's basically just like feeling state. And understanding your feeling state and how you relate to other humans when you're aware of your feeling, right? And then you can literally, just by talking a certain way, right? True. You can get people to engage in a specific sense, right? And kind of being aware of that and tying into that, you know, you influence the learning environment in ways that most people don't think about, you know? And a lot of times too, if you're not, and there's a detriment to too much self-awareness, but if you're not self-aware when you come into the classroom as like a professor and you're just rattled and you're like grading and you're like how are people going to receive that? And also, are people's brains and nervous systems going to be in a state of readiness to absorb information, right, at that point, right? So that becomes like something that's really, and it's almost like, I almost kind of want to say it's not something you can teach, but that really works bad for my profession. But it's like, it's one of those things that's implicit, and it's learned. And this is where it's like comes down. And this is like what I talk about in my workshops. It's like, you just got to go there. People, because in the workshops, I'll go in anything. I'll talk about mindfulness and meditation and whatever. And because that isn't as largely accepted in an academic setting. But, you know, in a workshop, hell yeah.
So the workshop is actually more for the professor as opposed to giving tips and tricks on how to get your students to. Interesting. See, I thought it was the other way around.
Yeah. Well, it's kind of like, you know, Cesar Millan, the dog whisperer?
No. But
this is so obscure, but I used to watch that show. Cesar Millan, he's the dog whisperer on like Animal Planet, right? And he was like, I rehabilitate dogs. I train people, right? And it's kind of like, you know, sometimes he has like these dogs and the dogs are the problem, but it's like, no, like the owner has to know how to properly facilitate and understand the psychology of the dog in order to get the dog to act right. So it's kind of like it's kind of like one of those, but
so you're the professor whisperer?
No. I mean, so the funny thing is the workshop, I mean, that was one workshop that I did for the union, the adjunct union. They kind of got me in that space, and then I got that workshop. I did the conference, and those are all kind of related to those. But the workshops that I do are different. The workshops that I do are for like the general public. And that's like where I kind of have a little bit more fun in terms of just going off the rails and talking about everything. In academia, you kind of stay to the textbook. You got to talk about specific theories, specific ideas. But the workshops are like everything and anything, like emotional intelligence, metabolism. I talk about breath work. I talk about cognitive bias. That's obviously a psychological idea. But then I talk about yoga, and I talk about, esoteric sciences. You talk about like geophysics, and I talk about biophysics, like the physical principles of, just anything and everything, even like piezoelectricity in your bones, right? Which is like a really wild idea.
Okay, now you got to explain. You can't just say something and not explain it. We don't have a dictionary here.
So piezoelectricity, this is crazy. And this is probably why all the spiritual community is all hooked on crystals and shit.
Okay.
You know when you turn a stove on and it goes tick, tick, tick,
Yeah.
tick? That's a crystal.
Okay.
You know how you make sonar? The waves that travel like sonar in a submarine?
Yeah.
You compress a quartz crystal.
Really?
Yeah.
Interesting.
So when you compress something that can't be compressed in a sense of a crystal is just a lattice, right? It's atoms that are like perfectly arranged and they can't compress any farther. But if you compress that, it creates like an atomic pressure, which actually creates a magnetic field.
Interesting.
So by pulsing on a crystal, you create a magnetic field. And this happens in your body. With the bone, in your bones, there's silica and all these other things. So silicate crystals exist in your bones.
Wow.
And when you compress them, they actually create a magnetic field. When you break a bone, the calcium actually ionizes in the bone and attracts more calcium to it. And that's how a bone regrows.
Wow.
Right? So there's physics underneath biology. And this is kind of the fun part where you study psychology, you realize psychology is just biology and biology is just chemistry and chemistry is just physics. Right? And you realize that all of this shit is the same thing with a different lens.
Huh.
Right? And that's really what I like to call like holistic integration. So the psychology, I did a talk for a spot called Lectures on Tap, which is a super cool organization. And they do lectures in Manhattan, and they basically book professors to do talks at bars. And it's the coolest thing because mostly the two things that I want to be doing in my life is like having a drink and talking about science. So they kind of just put it together.
Nice.
And it's really cool. So I did one talk and I called it Holistic Integration and the Concept of Self. And it was this idea that, first of all, the concept of self, like we talked about before, was that like, you create the idea of what you are, and all of these things are kind of simultaneous phenomena. As I think about something, as I think of like a really nice thought, it releases oxytocin, and oxytocin, dilates my thing, and then changes my feeling state. And then if I feel different, I'm going to act different. And if I act different, different things are going to happen to me.
Right.
Which kind of gets into that whole law of attraction, self-fulfilling prophecy thing, right? So that the thoughts that I have in mind translate through the hypothalamus, science, and create a physiochemical response in my body, which is going to change the way that I act. If I change the way that I act, I'm going to change the outcomes that I get. Change the outcomes I get, I now think about myself differently, which is then further going to self-perpetuate.
Wow.
Right?
Plug. No, that's great.
Yeah.
I love that.
Yeah.
So, do you ever? Obviously, you're. I say this with love. Obviously, you're a nerd. I'm a nerd too. Don't
I'm
worry.
such a nerd. Yeah. No, I embrace that shit.
So, do you? So do I. People make fun of me. I don't care. So, do you ever? Are you able to, because like right now, even the conversation that we're having, I felt like I was in class, and I don't mean that in a bad way. This is a great conversation, but do you ever feel like you can't turn that professor speak off? Is that how much you love the subject that it always sounds that way?
Well, I think definitely clarifying certain terms is important, right?
Mm-hmm.
Diving into those things is important, but yeah, I turn it off when I need to. For example, like when I'm on stage, I don't even speak. Obviously I'm singing words, right? But that's a whole other element of who I am, and I think there's different aspects of who I am in terms of that. And that's one of the avenues, so me as a musician, if you run into me on the street, I'm not going to talk about this, And the funny thing is, like, I have other musician friends and we all go out and we go out drinking and we hang out and, we play shows together and whatever. And half of them we don't even talk about this. Like, they don't ask me about it.
Okay.
If somebody asks me about it, I will, they'll be like, what's that about? I'll be like, oh, well, actually, like push my glasses up. Actually, I'll dive into it.
Okay.
And I like diving into it. And I think it's something that as a culture, we should normalize thinking about our existential and philosophical you know, implications of who and what we are, you know, and I think that's a conversation that we should all have more frequently, right? So I enjoy those conversations. So I bring it out when I get asked. But yeah, you know, for the most part too, I'm still a musician. I'm still a chill guy. I still like to hang out, you know.
Super chill guy. Super chill
Yeah,
guy.
yeah.
And you brought your guitar, so
I
we're going to
did.
hear something. Before we get to that, though, there's one game that I like to play with my
Cool.
guests. And have you ever heard of 6 Degrees of Kevin
Yes.
Bacon? Okay, so I do
Yeah.
the same thing except with me. So you get to name a celebrity,
Okay.
and I
okay.
have to try to connect myself.
Interesting.
In 6 degrees or less, yes. So far, we've had 100% rate of success on this. So
That's wild.
yeah. I do get to have help though, so
Okay, so you get to phone
Steve-
a friend.
Yeah. Well, because I have a horrible memory, so like I'll
right.
I'll be like, well, what movie were they in, and who was in the movie with them? So
Yeah. Okay, so let's do how about Samuel L. Jackson?
Sam Jackson. Okay.
Cool guy.
Name some movies, please.
Pulp Fiction. Snakes on a Plane.
I definitely couldn't do that one.
Django Unchained.
What happened? I can't hear you.
Oh, Django Unchained.
Django Unchained.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, who was in that one with him?
Jamie, what's his name?
Jamie Foxx.
Jamie Foxx.
And who else?
Leo.
Leo DiCaprio, right?
Yep.
Yeah, I think this one would be easier. So wait, Leo DiCaprio was in
Django, yeah.
no, but wasn't he in Departed?
The Departed.
Yeah.
Yes,
he in that
I
one?
think he was.
Believe so.
Okay. All right. So Samuel Jackson was in Django Unchained with Leo DiCaprio, who was in Departed with what's the one? They're best friends, Ben Affleck and Matt Damon, right?
Yeah.
Who's best friends with Matt Damon, who was married to Jennifer Lopez, who was with what's the Yankees guy?
Alex Rodriguez.
Thank you.
Okay.
And I'm personal friends with the Yankees chef, Ricardo Cordova.
Damn. Okay. You did. That's a 6 degree. That's awesome. That's really cool.
So that's a fun game I like.
That's
to
really
play.
hard though, because you got to remember like
All
your
that
entire
stuff. That's why
life.
I'm like, yeah. That's why I'm like, I have
It's
to
rough.
have help with like these movies.
You know, it's funny. My first thought was Jennifer Lopez,
Oh,
but then I was like, no, maybe like Natalie Portman. No, and then Sam Jackson came, and he was like,
Oh.
he's a great actor. So
I
was just kinda,
think
like,
it's kind of
spinning
cool that
things
I
in my
can
brain.
connect myself
Yeah,
to.
no,
So that's
100%.
fun. All right, so we have your guitar here, and I was super excited when I saw this in the parking lot because I would love to hear. I was watching some of your videos earlier today, and you're a great musician. Like I am highly impressed. But before you get what would you say is your influence musically?
So musically, I definitely, as I started playing instruments and I was getting into instrumentation, I was big on classic rock, obviously. So Led Zeppelin, Sabbath, Cream, Yes, King Crimson, all these really like, you know, prominent classic rock bands. And then I kind of dove more into grunge music, like heavier
Interesting.
stuff, you know, early 2000s. It was, you know, Tool was really cool for me. Alice in Chains was another really big band. I got hit by like the new metal movement with like Korn and like Limp
Oh, really?
Bizkit and the
Okay.
whole thing. Because I was an angry teenager, you know, so that shit just took me over. That didn't really influence my playing as much though. But you know, as I really evolved as a musician, you know, at first I was like, metal's the only music, like rock and metal, you know, because I thought I just kind of had that little blinder on. But as I became and developed more as a musician, I definitely started diving into different genres because, you know, you kind of have to study the plethora, right? It's like being a chef and only using 3 or 4 spices. It's like, you know, you got to dive into jazz, funk, soul, blues, you know, everything.
Ooh, I can see funk with you.
Yeah, funk is a big influence because funk is like one of those things where you just got to come back to the one. You know,
But see, like you seem old. I know you
seem old. Great way to say.
You seem older. Like I would, because that to me is how I was when I was in college. My high school, college days, and I just feel like, especially in this area, because you're from New Jersey, you're from this area.
Yeah, born and raised.
So I just feel like your generation, and I don't know if you want to tell the audience how old you are, because you're young. You're 35. So.
34.
34. And see, I gave you an extra year. So you're young. That everything you've accomplished, you know, how your mindset thinks, it just seems like an old soul. Like I
for
would not
sure.
have guessed that you're only, not that you look older. So I'm not, that's not where I'm going, but just the mentality is
Right.
not the same as other 34, 35
Listen, I've been that way
year olds
since
I
I
know.
was 7.
Wow.
Though. Like I've always kind of had that like, old soul energy to me. It was kind of weird because it's always just like there's got to be something. I always, for some reason, always had this like there's got to be something bigger. There's got to be something beyond this. There's got to
Really?
be something past
That's
this.
so
you know?
impressive because I just feel like Jersey is like this, incessant, I don't want to like insult any of my fans or my
Tomatoes
audience.
thrown at you right now.
Like,
What are you talking about New Jersey like that? What are you doing? We love you. What are you?
how you doing? Exactly my
Yeah,
point. That's
yeah.
exactly my point.
Yeah.
So it's nice to see, but you're a Bergen County kid too. So it's really nice to see that still exists. Has anybody ever, because I was telling somebody that I have you come in on my show today, and I'm like, I think the best way that I could describe you, if I had to use like a celebrity, it'd be Matthew McConaughey in
All right.
L-I-V-I-N.
Yeah.
That is what you
Yeah.
remind me of.
Right. I think it's just the Zen philosophy. It's the chill wave. It's
Yeah.
that fucking,
I'm just trying to live.
relaxed. Yeah, because that's how people should be. I mean, especially like when it's this idea of like people spend so much time trying to make a living that they forget how to live.
Right.
And that's like one of the things. And that's why, like, I don't know, man. I went to Europe for the first time like last year, and that was like, wow, like people actually breathe here. Like that's especially like being right outside of New York, being in this hustle bustle, hustle culture
Sure.
area. It's always like, stop and you die.
Yeah. No, you
so,
can't. Exactly.
Yeah,
It's
always
very cutthroat. That's like, the biggest, I was working in the city. I was right in Midtown at Penn 1, and it was the most exhilarating experience. But at the same time, it was so cutthroat that I was okay when I wasn't working in the city anymore. I get to say it's another bucket list I got to check off at least. That to me is just, you're right, that hustle and bustle that we have right there, that's what everyone kind of like
And it
epitomizes.
influenced like our upbringing and like the way that you relate to the world, and also the fact that too, like New York allegedly is like the capital of the world, as people say. If you don't make it in New York, you can't make it anywhere,
Yeah,
right? As they
yeah.
always say too. So it's really interesting, kind of growing up like right next to
Yeah.
this like mecca of like culture, and we're just kind of influenced by the overflow of it. And it's like you kind of have this this New York mentality, but it's just echoing through these like half suburb, half urban areas. If you're in West New York or Union City, you kind of still have that like energy. Newark, obviously, even too. I've played a lot of shows there. There's art galleries. Some places like over there feel like the Village. You know what I mean? And it's
Sure.
but I've always loved it. I've loved the diversity of this area. You can't really match that, and I kind of like the fast pace of it because my mind is always like fucking turning like this.
Yeah.
So it's cool to be able to kind of bounce off ideas around people and just be in an energy that's very active. And I think I would, if I didn't live in an area like New York, I would kind of atrophy. I'd be like the pace of things.
So
would
it's
be,
still definitely ingrained in you as being a part of your, yeah.
For sure. No, I love the big energy here. I love that fast pacedness. I love the the culture here. I can't get away from it. I remember one time on July 4th, I was sitting near Rutgers, like some house party, whatever, and I'm sitting there and I'm sitting next to this guy who's from Mexico, and he's like a painter and artist, and this other guy who is like a Chinese exchange student studying physics, and I think I was in my undergrad studying psych at that point, and we're all just like sitting there and there's fireworks going off, and I'm like, at that moment it dawned on me, like, I love this country. Like the fact that like we can all talk and commune and be of different backgrounds and be of different like pursuits, and like we're like literally our trajectories couldn't be more different. We're coming from different places, we're going different places, different aspirations, but we're all here right now in this moment, and we can commune and share and grow and learn and be in that space, and New Jersey makes it possible. So it's cool. It's very cool.
I love it. All right. So what, we got like 4 minutes left, so I definitely want to hear something. Where can we find you on social media?
So you can look up my Instagram. I am at self-perpetual. You can also go to selfperpetual.com. You'll find more about my workshops and the
Yep.
work that I do there. Probably dropping a single, so I should be on Spotify within the next
Ooh.
month or so. Because I've only been doing the solo stuff for about a couple years now.
Okay.
So I haven't really I've just started formally recording my music as part of my solo project. Because before that I was in, rock bands and metal bands and all sorts of stuff that didn't get released. So
So what are you going to play for us today?
I was actually, I wasn't really planning on playing a whole song, but I was going to just kind of jump around.
Okay.
I figured we were talking about the melodies of the mind and stuff like that.
I love that you like the title of the show.
Oh yeah, no, that was super cool. I was like, that's very like integrative and awesome. And I'm gonna try to, I guess, put this mic in the middle ground here and kind of, because you're. Because we were talking about just like what sort of melodies, what does something to the mind, right? And how a chord can kind of make you feel. So normally I play on a electric instrument. This is an acoustic bass, but so I can't do as much of the.
Right.
Maybe I can. Trying to push past the breath and the voice, 'cause there's so much involved in our freedom of choice. Trying to see that there's something greater. We see through the eyes of the Creator. The part where I put on the crazy distortion, and 'cause I found myself on this road of lost kingdoms. This is the part of the song where I talk to the crowd and I'm like, yeah, what's up, y'all? How y'all doing tonight? What's up, New York? What's up, New Jersey? And everyone's like, woo, oh my God, this is amazing, so cool.
Love it.
Yeah, so again, it's kind of this synergy that I like to create with the crowd and also just like kind of breathe with them. If it's a little crazy in the room, I'll play a little faster, I'll play a little slower.
Okay.
Catching the rhythm, moving in waves. It's so sad to say I haven't seen you in days. And all in the patterns of what you knew. And all is the product of what you do. 'Cause I found myself on this road of lost kingdoms. And normally this is the part of the song where I do like a loop and I do like some crazy solos and I do some all sorts of crazy built up shit. But since this is acoustic,
Still sounds amazing. Ooh. thank
so
you.
a little taste of just the sound and the music, and that's obviously something a little bit like more bluesy influenced, a little
Love
bit
it.
more, cool and calm and collected. But there's heavy stuff, there's light stuff, and everything in between. So.
Well, thank you so much for playing that. That was awesome. All right, before we get kicked out of the studio, thank you so much for your time. That was a great conversation. And thank you, everybody, for joining us and staying tuned this whole time. We got some people in the check-in still, so shout out to you guys for standing here this whole time. We're live, so I can't say it's a brand new week. I usually release on Sunday, so we're live. But mind your favorite Minx and join us next time. Peace out, everybody.